for my voice, but I have never seen anything like it.
Do you believe in miracles? Yes! Unbelievable.
Welcome back to the show. Andrew Zimmel, host as always. You know what day it is. It's time for Alexander Haynes to come on the podcast and talk to us about all the news and notes from around the week, talking about coronavirus. He has a very iconic line in here saying that we're not bats. So make sure that you clip your wings at the door. Take a seat. You got nothing else better to do. We're all in self-quarantine. We're all in social distancing where none of us leave our homes. All right, the man keeping us straight, the guy who shoots us down, or keeps us on the straight and narrow, I should say. It's Alexander Haynes on the phone line with us. Alexander, how's it hanging? How you doing?
I'm doing pretty well, all things considered. How are you?
I am doing well. Last week, you brought on some pretty good news. Got any good news for us to start this week?
Yeah, well, I'll have a quick one. The University of Washington today announced that they had initial success with an antibody test, and that probably by next week they will be ready to start handing it out to a wider population and start testing it in a wider population. That is good news because we do need a successful antibody test to be able to detect who's immune, who has all been infected, and really see how many people might have been infected overall. And that's going to be really important to answering the question is, are there more pre-symptomatic and slightly symptomatic cases, which would lower the case fatality rate, what we have so far? Right now, it is that New York is about 1 in 20 people in New York have passed away from coronavirus. And that's New York City. I should be very specific there, not state, New York City. So the current hypothesis is that the spread of infection may actually be a lot wider than what it has shown thus far. And that would lower the case fatality rate because right now it is steadily rising above the 3% that it was estimated back in early March, late February. The first estimate was it's going to end about 3.5%, kind of lowered to 2%. And in recent weeks, unfortunately, we have seen that because those estimates did not give people enough time to die, it can take up to a month to die from this, unfortunately, that the case fatality rate is now hovering at 5 all the way up to 10 and 12% in some regions.
So I saw a report that said that it could take 6 to 13 minutes to kind of get results back from some of these new tests that could be rolling out. What do you have? You have any information on that?
I don't have a whole lot of information on that so far. I know multiple countries around the world are working on developing a reliable test because false positives and false negatives are still a concern. That is still a very ready concern. No real news for that. I would stay updated just to wait for cities to start rolling out. One of the reasons that is important, and this kind of ties into other news stories, is that in Louisiana, they took on the offer for the federal government to help them in testing. And while this seemed to be a positive, what they experienced, Politico reported this earlier this week, was that they received a database back with test results, but no way to contact the people that were tested. There is a miscommunication, and the database was corrupted when it was sent back. So Louisiana is now looking at starting to do testing at a state level and start issuing state-run drive-through test centers like we've seen in South Korea. And remember, this is something that South Korea had within the first week of the coronavirus outbreak in Daegu. That is something that we still have not seen readily throughout the United States. Some cities have it. University of Washington has it only for people who are clinicians or who are emergency personnel. Colorado does have it for their population. I know Houston has drive-through test centers for their wider population. But a quick test is still something that is not ready at every single state level.
Yeah, that was kind of my question, I guess, is that the state governments, I think, have been doing an okay job in a lot of ways to set this up. Can you tell me a couple of states who have done a good job of kind of controlling COVID?
Yeah, so obviously the best ones thus far have been probably Washington State and California. And that's relative. I mean, both states have been hit hard. Both states could have done things better. Washington State was the earliest state to kind of put social distancing and put a lockdown, start sending people home, start asking employers to have their employees work from home, to start shutting schools down. And because of that early lockdown, there has been the curve was definitely flattened. And I believe everybody knows what that means so far. But in case, just to cover that concept real quick, basically the cases are more spread out. So there's not an initial spike of cases. There is a relative curve, a flatter curve of cases on a graph. So that the hospitals are not overwhelmed. Hospitals in Washington State have not been entirely overwhelmed. California. Now, the question in California is what has happened there, because there is more immigrants from China and more migrants from China than really anywhere else in the United States. And I'm not trying to put this on Chinese people. I know that's a very contentious issue, and I'd hate for anybody to think that's what I'm saying. But really what we're looking at is two waves. And the first wave did originate from Wuhan, China. And the second wave really originated from France, Germany, and Italy. And so California was hit by the first wave because it is a West Coast city, because it has a huge immigrant population from China. And because of that, researchers at Stanford are looking at how long has this been around in California. And they're going to start issuing antibody tests hopefully soon. And they're going to test and try to trace back when it first originated in California, which again, California has seen, they have more cases than some other states, but they also have a relatively flat curve. They have handled hospitals were hit hard, and they did go over capacity, but they did not go extremely over capacity like we've seen in New York and now Michigan. And so the kind of the thing is that California may be reaching herd immunity. That is the hypothesis that Stanford is trying to disprove. So that is going to be something to watch in California. Those are two states that have handled it relatively well.
So we see that President Trump said today that the peak is past, the U.S. to reopen soon. I don't think completely understand that, okay, last week was the peak, but there is still a concern for Americans to get sick and for hospitals. We talk about flattening the curve. There's still a chance for hospitals to be overflooded. Has the peak passed? Is the U.S. going to open soon from what you've seen?
So it looks like the peak has hit, but I'm not 100% sure. And I can't answer that question because that unfortunately all depends on the virus's timing. And also our reaction to it. If we stay social distancing, odds are we may have hit the peak of the first and second wave in the United States. That being said, the country is not going to or should not. It may reopen soon, but I don't believe it should reopen soon. And this is kind of one misconception that has really needed clearing up recently. Because one of the concerns is that people look at that initial chart, and the chart that's being used by the White House and several other countries is Neil Ferguson's. He's an epidemiologist at Imperial College in London, and he was one of the first researchers to develop a model to really get on this story and to start sounding the alarm back in early January, actually. And so, because of that, multiple countries have picked up his model, and there's a couple different charts on it and a couple different curves on it. And there's a really bad curve, a moderate curve, and a lower curve. And so what ended up happening is that countries said, if we do not react this way, tons and tons of people are going to die. We saw up to 2 million people in the United States could die from coronavirus based on this model. And so far, we have seen extreme amounts of death, but we have not seen the worst case scenario. So there has been a backlash against the lockdown measures, saying that these charts were wrong, these charts were incorrect, we have not seen the mass deaths, so why are we all quarantining, why are we locked down, we can go out now, we can reopen. Well, that's not true. the curve depends on our actions. And so we did not see the mass death because we took action. We did not, and that all depends, the reproductive rate, all this math depends on human action and what we can do about it. So if we reopen too early, we could still see that extreme measure of that imperial college model where we see probably 1.5 to 2 million deaths. So that is a very concern. And I just kind of wanted to explain that a little bit more, just to make sure that everybody understands that because the experts were not wrong in the amount of deaths seen, but what they shared was the extreme measures. This is where we're at right now. Speaking before the lockdowns are initiated, this is where we're at in our behavior. Therefore, we are going to see 2 million deaths. But if we change our behavior, we will see lower amounts of death. And unfortunately, I do believe that we reacted too late to see. We still have seen a tragic amount of deaths in the United States.
All right, let's move on to Michigan, who had their Operation Gridlock rally today outside of Lansing. Bunch of people get out of their cars, park their cars on a long stretch of road, have the entirety of their whole agenda, from what I understand, was to say that freedom is essential and that these shut-ins, these self-quarantines, the social distancing, that the governments need to open everything back up again. First off, I'd like to hear your opinion on that. But second off, where do we stand on stuff like that? Because I think that this isn't the first. I think this is the first of many that are going to come down the pipeline.
Yeah, so, and this already happened in Louisiana this week, and unfortunately several pastors decided that they wanted to hold Easter services and made it more of a political service than an Easter service, and they were arrested for hosted and endangering the public. But this is probably, and then it happened, I know this wasn't religiously toned today, this was purely politically toned, but it is very, very concerning that this is happening. And my opinion is 100% against it. It's bizarre to me. I do not understand it. It is, I get, because America is really unique in that the First Amendment is heavily discussed here, and because it is one of the things that makes America great, and it is one of the things that makes America unique, is the First Amendment. However, free speech and freedom to assembly and it's still there. Just do it at home. You're not getting censored on Twitter. Right now, we're in the middle of a pandemic. People are going to die from this. So just wait a couple of months and then you can get back out and rally again. And it'll all be over. So I know where this is coming from. And it's coming from a lot of conspiracy theories, unfortunately. There's been a flood of disinformation and misinformation and conspiracy theories. And I would really go one step further. I'm going to steal this phrase, a recipe for Caesar, from, if anybody's familiar with Dan Carlin and Common Sense, another podcast. And that was the topic of his political podcast a few weeks ago. And it was about how scenarios like this are kind of a recipe for creating a character like Caesar. And if we stay home, and I'll just cut to the chase, if we stay home, if we socially distance, we'll all be okay. There's not going to be some dictatorship coming. There's not going to be people looking to take away our freedoms. There is a very good discussion to have about monitoring people and the privacy issues. But even with that, it's probably worth giving up a little bit of privacy to be able to enable, okay, where have you been if you are infected? There are very safe ways to handle that. That's a whole other topic, though. That freedom of speech is not in any way harmed right now. We just need to take a step back and collectively fight something together. And because of that, and if we don't, and if we continue to go out, and if we continue to damage our nation and to damage our economy, well, then we're going to have a recipe for somebody who is a Caesar, because we're going to have no option but to have absolutely draconian rule if we want to have anything left. Unfortunately, that's how serious this virus is right now.
So let's move on. Universities, a lot of places are talking about shutting it down for the fall semester as well. I think that this is going to be a real big topic, a real talking point during the summer if this rolls into July and August. Are universities going to have freshmen? Are they going to have students come back on campus? We already saw, I want to say, every major university, I think every Division I university in the country has shut it down, put everything online. I have been a fan of it. I think that it has worked out pretty well. I think that it's really stopped the spread relatively quickly. But the idea of everything being online all the way to 2021, I think, makes a lot of people nervous, Alexander.
It does. And there's two fronts to this, is that students are not, or teachers, teachers are not all trained to teach online. There's going to have to be mass training this summer. There's going to have to be a lot of money pushed towards online infrastructure, because unfortunately Wi-Fi is not great everywhere. Online infrastructures glitch, they give out. There's higher rates of cheating concern. There's very good software that prevents cheating, but you got to pay for it. You got to institute it. Most institutions do have distance learning options, but not all. And especially once you get to some rural areas, once you get to more traditional colleges, especially, we think of fine arts as something that can be very readily taught online, but what about something like engineering or chemistry or biology, human biology, where you really need a lab to thoroughly complete some of these courses? You need an internship to get hands-on experience. There's a lot of hurdles for students that are going to have to be addressed this coming fall semester. I believe that the universities, that they will be able to use their ingenuity to create a solution, but it's going to be a very creative one, and it's a very difficult problem to address. I mean, I completely understand why people are nervous.
Yeah, no, and I've said this: the price of tuition has been increasing year after year, and something like this, I think, is going to make a lot of industries and a lot of places and culture look themselves in the mirror. I think a lot of people are going to look in the mirror. I think they're going to look at some of these, establishments with a little bit more scrutiny. There's no reason for this type of exuberant spending on higher education. But I've said this, that I told my parents this, I have a parent who's working from home. I said that if your productivity is better during this quarantine than it was in your office, then you might get stuck at home forever. Because I think that you're going to see a lot of universities find that even with everybody being stuck at home, I think grades are going to be a little bit better. I think you're going to see a little bit better writing from some of your students. And the productivity in the private sector as well, the workforce, I could see a boost in productivity from those working from home.
100% agree with that. Allowing you to do a Zoom meeting instead of traveling 50 miles, which takes 2 to 3 hours out of your day. People in Seattle commute an hour and a half in the morning, another hour and a half in the evening. That's 3 hours of lost productivity, more car accidents, other health concerns that rise from that. I think that that's part of once this is all said and done, that's part of the positive storyline that will come out of this, is there's going to be a major shift in workplace culture.
All right, let's move on. Fox News is reporting that there is sources, quote unquote, believe coronavirus originated in a Wuhan lab as part of China's effort to compete with the U.S. When we talk about the different things, they have unnamed sources in here, and one source said it could be, quote, the costliest government cover-up of all time. We had a listener send in this article, and we wanted to hear your thoughts on it, Alexander.
Definitely. So I'm really glad you brought this up. So there is two things can be true and false at the same time. So did China cover this up? 100%. 100%. I don't want to pretend like I'm trying to protect the CCP at all. They have a lot to answer for, because there is signs that this could have been stopped in Wuhan. They could have taken the drastic measures, and this could have been over months ago. Did this originate in a lab in Wuhan? Most likely, no. So I'll address the easy one to address is, was this a man-made biological weapon? And a couple months ago, asked some people who are smarter than I and do stuff like this for a living about that. And it was, other than all the obvious ones, the really glaring area why this was clearly not man-made is that the binding mechanism, and this is super layman's terms, I apologize to any scientists who are listening. The layman's terms is the binding mechanism that this version of coronavirus uses to bind to the ACE2 receptor is different than anything that we've seen before. It is something that has never been made in the lab. It is something that has not been seen in a lab. It is something that clearly evolved in nature. So, and if it was man-made, there'd be no reason to take the time to let something evolve its own binding mechanism. You could have just selected another one. So this is clearly not man-made. Now, the other question is that was this released because of poor safety handling in Wuhan? And that basically what it is that there was people who were working with bat coronaviruses, or somebody working with bat samples out in the wild who was not careful, who either got I've heard multiple versions, bit by a bat, who let a viral strain leak in the lab, who is not careful with something in the lab, multiple versions of that. Most likely, again, no. I want to stress that these are anonymous sources. I have heard nothing like this from any of my sources. And I have not heard anything like this that is very plausible. There are several other conditions why it is very, very unlikely this originated from or was leaked from a lab in Wuhan. And again, it goes back to the way that this evolved, is that this had to evolve in nature. At some point, it did jump from animal to human. In the likely scenario, and again, this we won't know. We probably will never know, unfortunately, because of the Chinese government cover-up. But the likely scenario is that this originally jumped from a animal, possibly a bat, very probably a bat, but there's other animals out there, to a human at some point, or from a bat to another animal to a human, and it moved around. It evolved in humans to affect, because that's the other thing, is it has to effectively evolve inside of humans to be able to attack the human cells. It cannot evolve in a bat and then attack a human. Different. We're not bats. So it evolved in humans for some time, and then it got loose in the wet market. It was still able to move through animals there, move through a dish, and the wet market is possibly the origin of it, but it could have been any other restaurant in Wuhan. At some point, though, it evolved from humans and skipped around in Wuhan, and that's what we know. And we know that there was a cover-up. The scenario where it jumped from a lab is very unlikely. But I could be wrong. I could be totally wrong, and it could have escaped from a lab. But there's too many indicators that it didn't. That I believe that's a very, very, very unlikely scenario.
So President Trump, two phases here. One, he cuts funding to the World Health Organization. A lot of people have criticized the World Health Organization, saying that they didn't do enough to protect the international community, didn't do enough to protect the world, and that because they didn't do enough, the United States should get to cut funding from them. What's your response to that?
So the World Health Organization is, well, first off, my response is this is a very poor time to do that. The World Health Organization has a lot to answer for. They punted around. There is definitely a lot of corruption and the top leadership of the World Health Organization in connections to the CCP. They have a lot to answer for, and there's definitely things that they need to take, or the United Nations, that the world has to take a very hard look at the World Health Organization and the people and leadership and say, what is going on here? What happened? What can we do better? However, cutting funding to the World Health Organization is going to have two very catastrophic effects. The first is a humanitarian concern, and that is the World Health Organization is key to getting aid into Africa and into poorer nations. Right now, there is one of the reasons, unfortunately, that we have not heard much about Africa is because there are places that are harder hit, but there are also there's a lack of testing in Africa. There is a lack of care inside of Africa that is going to have, that is, and not only coronavirus concerns, other disease concerns that outbreak in Africa. The World Health Organization is essential for poor countries in that region. The other condition is that in China, there is a push for a Chinese-led, or at least a Pan-Asian Pacific Chinese-led version of a World Health Organization. And that is, we all know how that is going to end based on the corruption in the CCP. With the United States officially pulling out of the World Health Organization, funding-wise, that kind of hands it all over to China. China is going to be able to very much easier call the plays the World Health Organization. There's not going to be the ability to ultimately push for the investigation, to push for the questions to be answered if the United States doesn't have money in it. Other countries, the European Union, United Kingdom, they can push for those answers, but when you look at the charts and the money that was given, the United States led all those regions. So it's a very ill-timed and short-sighted decision, in my opinion.
So let's move on to part 2 of the Trump fiasco. He has decided to put his name on all the stimulus checks going forward in a outstanding move from those of us that like to look at our handwriting. I don't know about you, but when I was in 3rd and 4th grade just learning cursive, I would write my name over and over and over again. Unlike me, Donald Trump has not outgrown that hobby. This is crazy to me.
I don't get this. This is probably one of the more concerning things that has happened. Not only him putting his name on the stimulus checks, and there is kind of this concern of that the daily press briefings are turning into political rallies. And I get that I get that any president up there would try to make it look as good as possible, but this is turning into blatant, where there is kind of this. There's definitely a lot of ire there. There's a lot of propaganda that is being pushed. There is a lot of divisiveness that is being pushed. There's a lot of falsehoods that are being pushed. The president had, or I forget the exact quote, but the president has ultimate authority. It's not ultimate power. That's a Star Wars reference. But that is a very concerning line that he gave, and the fight that is breaking out between the states and the federal level is not going to end well. That has never ended well in American history. Federalism is a very strong suit of the Constitution, of United States policy, and that is very much at threat here with federal government and the Trump's White House issuing, well, we can decide when to reopen as a nation and not leaving it up to the states to control the lower levels, to assist themselves in this outbreak. And that has led to a very awkward, and it's going to continue to get more awkward, decision where there has been a pact signed by governors in the Northeast as well as governors on the West Coast, California, Oregon, Washington, that they will work together to reopen together, and only when all the states in that pact are ready to open. Basically protecting themselves, and I'm laughing because it's so bizarre to say, that protecting themselves from the federal government issuing a short-sighted mandate. This is going to continue to get worse if the White House's messaging does not change soon. And I do hope it changes. I do think there is room where officials will see where this is heading, towards a long rupture, and a very a rupture that is not going to be healed by any president going forward. It's going to take a George Washington to heal the distrust between governors and the federal government moving forward.
See, and I take that not lightly. That is a very bold, very strong statement. All right, before we get off this coronavirus thing, I just want to throw out there, hook this back into sports. Story coming out of the Wall Street Journal talking about how the Chiefs winning the Super Bowl potentially saved California from being like New York City, because the 49ers didn't win the Super Bowl. They didn't have a parade. Because they didn't have a parade, the potential coronavirus underneath the surface didn't spread to more people. I just wanted to get your take on that news story and how Patrick Mahomes now is the savior of California.
That it's very likely. I didn't read that story, but I kind of had a similar thought of just a few months ago. I was more thinking back. A few months ago, I was watching the Super Bowl. I was very concerned about coronavirus. I was very concerned about how it was being handled, but I didn't think it would get this bad. We were watching the Super Bowl in bliss with crowds and friends, and it was great. That's likely. That's a very possible. If this antibody test that Stanford University is doing shows that coronavirus has been around in California for longer than we thought, very likely Patrick Mahomes is the savior of California.
All right, let's move on to just other news and notes. Former President Barack Obama endorses Joe Biden. Elizabeth Warren comes up and endorses him as well. Neither one of these things comes as a surprise, I think, to either one of us. It was weird, the reaction to Obama's co-signing for Biden, because it was expected, and yet people still made a mountain out of a molehill to me with the endorsement.
Yeah, this was something that we should have seen coming for a long time. I'm actually more interested in the story of why Obama did not do this sooner. I know that was a story for a while. It was kind of expected. Well, Joe was one of the first to really invoke Obama's name, that, hey, Obama and I are friendly. And a lot of people liked Obama. And that is something that worked specifically in the South, where Joe Biden was able to secure key victories in primaries that Bernie and Elizabeth Warren were not pushing ads with Obama in them. And Joe Biden was able to push those ads. So I'm a little bit more surprised that endorsement did not come sooner. This was very much expected, though, and I don't see it being a big deal.
Do you think Biden, I'm going to ask you this every day, every time that we do a podcast until November, can Joe Biden unite the Democratic Party?
Great question. Yes, I think he can, because the anti-Trump sentiment is very, very strong, and there is a lot of push that it's more anti-Trump than Biden, which I think can unite a lot more people than just putting Biden's return to normalcy campaign out there. So right now I will say yes, but there's still a lot of infighting that I see people saying voting for Biden is a vote for Trump, which, if you believe that, can you message me, please? Because I don't quite understand that, and I need to understand that logic more, where that's coming from.
I think that's it for me. Anything I'm missing?
That's it. Just stay safe, wash your hands, and stay inside, please.
Alexander Haynes, making this podcast normal. Thanks so much, man.
Thank you very much.
Thank you to Alexander. Thanks to you guys for checking out the show. Tomorrow, we got more good content coming down the pipeline for you. I don't know what it is just yet, but we will figure it out together. So hopefully you guys are staying safe. Hopefully you guys are quarantining yourselves, and I will talk to you again tomorrow.